They thought the palace would stay silent, but at 9:30 a.m., the silence shattered like glass, because when Princess Anne steps forward, it's never for decoration. It's for damage control, or a final blow. And this time, the target wasn't a tabloid, a rumor mill, or a Twitter storm. It was a narrative that had been spiraling out of control. A narrative tied to Prince Harry, Meghan Markle, and a luxury lifestyle claimed so outrageous that even seasoned royal aides were left blinking. The statement dropped with surgical precision. No emotion, no theatrics, just cold, polished steel, and confirmed that a so-called sovereign lifestyle accommodation expectation had been privately floated during Harry and Meghan's marriage. A list of ultra-luxury conditions that allegedly included private jets, yacht access, elite residences, and diplomatic-level treatment. But here's the twist that made courtiers choke on their morning tea. The palace says those expectations were never royal obligations. Not approved, not endorsed, not funded, personal, between spouses, period. And when Meghan's legal filing in California reportedly tried to frame those unmet luxuries as part of marital breakdown arguments, the court reaction, according to insiders, was icy. The idea that a civil marriage could enforce royal-style privilege reportedly got brushed aside like a bad screenplay. Palace sources didn't need to gloat and did the talking. Calm, direct, devastating. But that was just the first tremor, because while the legal drama simmered, another explosion was already ripping through the internet, courtesy of Canadian psychologist and cultural commentator Jordan Peterson. His podcast episode didn't whisper, it detonated. In it, he questioned Meghan's carefully polished public persona, suggesting that long before palace corridors and royal balconies, there were elite networking circles, luxury settings, and power broker environments that didn't quite match the later narrative of outsider innocence. The centerpiece of that storm? Allegations about appearances on an ultra-luxury yacht in the Gulf region years before the royal chapter began. No palace endorsement, no royal connection, and clarified, just a sharp line drawn in ink. Whatever Meghan's past social world looked like, it did not involve the crown. And here's where the temperature really rises. Because Anne didn't attack Meghan's past directly. She didn't repeat Peterson's language. She didn't even dignify the yacht claims with outrage. Instead, she reframed the battlefield. The monarchy, she emphasized, will not be used as a backdrop for personal mythology. Translation in palace dialect: don't drag the crown into stories it never wrote. But that line landed hard, especially in Britain, where cost of living pressures have sharpened public sensitivity to anything resembling elite excess. Suddenly, the issue wasn't celebrity gossip, it was institutional survival. The palace message was crystal clear. Royal finances come from structured grants and estate revenues, not mystery luxury adventures. The crown is tightening its belt, not chartering yachts. And in the middle of all this, Harry, because while Meghan's alleged expectations and Peterson's commentary dominated headlines, insiders say palace concern quietly shifted toward the children. Stability, routine, normalcy, words that sound simple until your life is lived between continents, cameras, courtrooms, and brand deals. And known for emotional restraint that borders on legendary, reportedly made it plain, childhood is not a PR strategy. That cut deeper than any financial clarification. Observers say this is the moment the tone changed. The Sussex saga stopped being framed as a feud and started being framed as a responsibility question. Not who hurt who, but who is protecting the kids from the fallout. Meanwhile, the media circus keeps spinning. Talk shows debate, comment sections combust. And hovering over it all is the looming question no one in the palace wants to say out loud, yet everyone is thinking, if the marriage collapses under this weight, what happens to Harry? Peterson raised it bluntly. Would the institution ever allow a path back? Would the prince be separated from the narrative that helped define his exit? No answers yet, just strategic silence, the kind that means discussions are happening behind walls thicker than scandal. And hovering in the background like a ghost from an earlier chapter? Oprah Winfrey. Her past interview with the couple once shook the monarchy. Now, as new questions swirl, her silence is being analyzed as loudly as any statement. What makes this moment explosive isn't just the accusations, the podcasts, or the legal filings. It's that the palace is no longer playing defense through silence. Anne's message signals a pivot. Clarity over courtesy, structure over spectacle. The crown is drawing borders, financial, symbolic, emotional. And the subtext? If you step away from royal duty, you also step away from royal cushioning. No half in fairy tales, no blurred lines, no using the institution as a stage prop while living a separate commercial life. That's the real earthquake here. Because for years, the Sussex story lived in a gray zone. Not fully royal, not fully independent, emotionally charged and media fueled. And just flipped on the floodlights floodlights and erased the gray. Now the world is watching for the next move. Harry's, Meghan's, the palaces, and maybe most of all, the children's future, which suddenly feels like the moral center of a saga that used to be about fame, freedom, and fairy tales gone wrong. The doors aren't slamming in public, they're closing softly behind velvet curtains, where decisions that reshape history never make a sound. Inside palace walls, the temperature has shifted from shock to strategy. What began as whispered disbelief over luxury expectations and viral podcast bombshells has evolved into something colder, more permanent: containment. Not the messy, emotional kind, the institutional kind. The kind monarchies have survived on for centuries. Because here's what most people outside the gates don't realize: the crown doesn't panic. It recalibrates. In private briefings following Anne's statement, aides reportedly focused on one phrase that has been echoing through corridors: symbolic separation. Not just physical distance, not just financial independence. Symbolic, meaning the monarchy is preparing to redraw the mental picture the public holds. Royal life on one side, personal brand empire on the other. No overlap, no soft lighting, no shared spotlight. That's why the messaging has turned so precise. Every clarification about funding, every reminder about official duties, every careful refusal to engage directly with the more sensational accusations. It's not avoidance, it's insulation. And at the center of that insulation effort is a realization that hits senior royals like a splash of ice water. Martin's scandal doesn't just stain reputation, it monetizes it. Controversy becomes content. Pain becomes platform. Victimhood becomes brand equity. The palace, built on continuity and restraint, suddenly found itself orbiting a media universe powered by exposure and emotional spectacle. That clash of worlds is what finally forced the pivot. Sources close to internal discussion say the biggest fear isn't what has already been said, it's what could be said next. Tell all interviews, streaming ex-boss, memoirs with clarifications, each one capable of dragging the institution back into narratives it is now trying desperately to exit. Which brings us back to Harry, the wild card wrapped in royal DNA. Unlike the institution, he lives in the emotional dimension of this saga. Reports suggest he's caught between two gravitational pulls: the life he chose and the life that shaped him. Financial ventures, media deals, public statements, all now viewed through a harsher lens as legal battles and credibility questions swirl. If the marriage unravels publicly, the pressure on him to define where he stands could become unbearable. And here's the part that makes insiders uneasy. A return wouldn't look like a rescue. It would look like probation. Any path back, if one is ever offered, would likely be stripped of glamour. No grand balcony moments. No instant restoration of status. Just quiet duty, strict boundaries, and a long process of rebuilding trust that was fractured on global television. The palace, according to whispers, would frame it not as forgiveness, but as service. Because the monarchy's greatest fear right now isn't embarrassment, it's erosion. The slow blurring of what royal even means in a world where titles trend like hashtags and legacy can be edited in a podcast studio. That's why Anne's intervention felt so sharp. She wasn't just correcting a narrative, she was protecting a definition. And then there are the children, the one subject that melts palace steel into something almost human. Behind the scenes, conversations have reportedly shifted from legal optics to daily life details, schooling consistency, stable residences, routines untouched by filming schedules or legal strategies. Courtiers who rarely speak emotionally are said to have described the situation as too public, too unstable, too exposed. That concern has become the moral anchor of the palace response. Not image, not money, childhood. It's also why the criticism, though measured, feels heavier than any tabloid jab. Questioning luxury claims is one thing. Questioning parental stability lands in a different place entirely. Meanwhile, across the Atlantic, silence has become its own form of noise. No fiery rebuttals, no dramatic press conferences, just legal teams, carefully worded non-responses, and allies hinting that the full story has yet to be told. That promise that there's always another layer is exactly what keeps the palace on edge, because every new chapter risks reopening the door Anne just tried to close. Public reaction is splitting down the middle. Some see the palace stance as cold, even ruthless. Others view it as overdue discipline after years of blurred boundaries. But almost everyone agrees on one thing: the fairy tale framing is gone. What's left is a high-stakes power struggle between personal narrative and institutional survival. And the institution has one advantage individuals never do: time. Scandals that feel explosive in the moment often fade into footnotes in royal history books, but only if the crown resists being pulled into the emotional whirlpool. That's the tightrope Anne is walking. Speak enough to set boundaries. Stay silent enough to avoid feeding the spectacle. Because the deeper truth beneath all the drama, the yachts, the podcasts, the court filings is this. The monarchy is fighting not just for reputation, but for relevance in an age that rewards exposure over endurance. By drawing hard lines now, Anne is betting that discipline will outlast drama. Whether that bet pays off depends on what happens next. A reconciliation? A courtroom escalation? A headline-grabbing interview designed to flip sympathy once again? Every possibility hangs in the air like humidity before a storm. But one thing is already clear. The era of half-in, half-out ambiguity is closing. The palace has chosen structure over sentiment, boundaries over buzz, legacy over likes. And in royal history, when lines are drawn this firmly, they rarely get erased. They rarely get erased. They rarely get erased.